Have you ever wondered what crazy foods medieval people actually ate at their dinner tables? These folks munched on stuff so wild that most modern people would rather starve than take a single bite. Today, I'm revealing 10 shocking medieval foods that will blow your mind completely. Half pig, half chicken, medieval chefs created the world's weirdest food mashup called Cockentrice. They took a rooster, cut it in half, and sewed it to the bottom half of a pig. Then they roasted this Frankenstein creature and covered it in egg, yolks, and saffron. Rich people loved showing this off at fancy dinners. Imagine cutting into what looks like a chicken and finding pig meat inside. This wasn't a joke, it was serious fine dining. Blood-sucking fish lampreys look like something from your worst nightmares. Picture an eel with a suction cup face filled with rows of sharp teeth that sucks blood from bigger fish. Medieval people thought this disgusting creature was absolutely delicious. They ate it especially on days when meat wasn't allowed. King Henry I of England loved lampreys so much that he literally ate himself to death. Doctors said he died from eating too many of these blood-sucking monsters. The king's last meal was a feast of lampreys that his stomach couldn't handle. Roasted cat. If you're a cat lover, you might want to skip this one. Medieval people had detailed recipes for cooking fat cats. First, they would kill the cat and cut off its head because they believed eating cat brains would make you lose your mind. After skinning the cat, they wrapped it in clean cloth and buried it underground for a whole day and night. This was supposed to improve the taste somehow. Then, they dug it up, put it on a roasting spit, and cooked it over fire while basting it with garlic and oil. The strangest part was, they whipped the roasting cat with green twigs while it cooked. The recipe actually says to treat it as if it was a very naughty cat. People believed cat meat could cure various illnesses and was perfectly normal dinner. Food. Dolphin soup. Here's something that will shock you. Medieval people regularly ate dolphins and called them pigs of the ocean. Since dolphins lived in water, smart medieval folks decided they must be fish, not mammals. This meant they could eat dolphin meat during religious fasting periods, when regular meat was banned. They made dolphin soup with almond milk, wheat, and expensive saffron spices. Only rich people could afford this royal fish, unless they got special permission. A 15th century cookbook even gives recipes for dolphin roasts and dolphin sausages. The meat was dark red, almost black, and tasted like beef liver when cooked. Modern people would be horrified, but back then, it was considered fancy food. Beaver, tail. Medieval people had a clever trick to eat meat during fasting periods when meat was forbidden. They decided that beaver tails were cold and therefore counted as fish, not meat. This weird logic meant they could munch on beaver tails every Friday and during Lent when regular meat was banned. The best part is that, eventually, church officials declared that the entire beaver counted as fish because it was such a good swimmer. By the 17th century, when the Bishop of Quebec asked if his people could eat whole beavers on Fridays, the church said yes. Their reasoning was that anything that spends most of its time in water must be a fish. Medieval illustrations even show beavers with actual fish tails to support this crazy idea. So families could enjoy a nice beaver roast while technically following religious fasting rules. It was the perfect religious loophole for meat lovers who didn't want to break church laws. Spiky hedgehogs might seem impossible to eat because of their sharp spines, but medieval people figured out how to turn them into dinner. The recipe started by cutting the hedgehog's throat and gutting it completely. Then cooks had two options: wrap the spiky creature in pastry to make a hedgehog pie, or roast it directly over fire. But hedgehogs weren't just food, they were also considered powerful medicine. Medieval doctors prescribed hedgehog meat to treat everything from sore throats to the deadly disease, leprosy. People believed that eating hedgehog fat or intestines could cure almost any illness. The spines were carefully removed before cooking, but the process was time-consuming and required skill. Hedgehog meat was considered a delicacy among people who could afford it. Interestingly, hedgehogs were one of the few wild animals that peasants were sometimes allowed to hunt and eat, since nobles didn't consider them a valuable game. The meat was described as tasting somewhat like rabbit, but greasier. Modern people would find this absolutely disgusting, but medieval folks saw hedgehogs as both dinner and medicine cabinet rolled. into one spiky package. Swan in feathers medieval. Dinner parties featured one of the most dramatic dishes ever created, roasted swan, served in its own feathers. This wasn't just food, it was dinner theater. Cooks had two different methods for preparing this spectacular dish. The first method involved mincing the boiled swan's guts with bread, ginger, and blood, then seasoning everything with vinegar for a grotesque stuffing. The second method was even more elaborate and theatrical. Cooks would carefully skin the swan while keeping the feathers and skin completely intact. Then they roasted the naked bird on a rotating spit until perfectly cooked, but here's where it gets really wild. After roasting, they would redress the swan in its original skin and feathers, making it look like a beautiful living bird sitting on the dinner table. When guests saw this magnificent living swan, they would gasp in amazement before realizing it was actually their dinner. The swan's neck was positioned to look natural and elegant, and the whole presentation was designed to wow dinner guests. This dish was so expensive and impressive that only the richest nobles could afford to serve it at their most important banquets and celebrations. Sheep, private parts. One of the most shocking medieval dishes involved sheep's private parts prepared in the most elaborate way possible. Cooks would start by thoroughly washing and cleaning a male sheep's reproductive organ, which was considered perfectly normal food back then. But the preparation process was incredibly complex and fancy. They would carefully stuff the organ with the yolks of exactly 10 eggs, expensive saffron spice that cost more than gold, rich milk, and fat from other animals. This mixture created a rich, golden filling inside the unusual casing. After stuffing, the whole thing was blanched in boiling water to partially cook it, then roasted over an open fire until golden brown. As a finishing touch, cooks sprinkled the finished dish with expensive imported spices, ginger, cinnamon, and black pepper. These spices were so costly that only wealthy people could afford them, making this dish a serious status symbol. The result was supposedly a delicious and impressive meal that showed off the host's wealth and the cook's skill. Medieval people had no shame about eating organs that modern people wouldn't even want to look at. To them, wasting any part of an animal was foolish, and they found creative ways to make even the strangest parts taste good with enough spices and fancy preparation. Chicken garbage medieval people had a dish they literally called garbage, and it was exactly as gross as it sounds. This charming meal consisted of everything from a chicken that modern people throw away, heads with the beak still attached, scaly feet with claws, slimy livers, and tough gizzards. But medieval cooks didn't just toss these parts in a pot. They created an elaborate recipe that was supposedly delicious. All these chicken bits were carefully stewed in rich broth, flavored with expensive spices that cost a fortune. The spice mix included black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, mace, fresh, parsley, and sage. They also added bread to thicken the stew and make it more filling. The final touch was serving it with ginger and other exotic seasonings. What makes this even more disgusting is that medieval people actually looked forward to eating garbage. It wasn't considered low-class food. It was a legitimate dish served at respectable dinners. The name garbage came from an old word meaning the parts of an animal that weren't the main meat, not because it was actual trash. But knowing that doesn't make the idea of eating chicken heads any more appealing. Medieval folks believed in using every single part of an animal, waste nothing, and they got creative about making even the grossest parts taste good with enough spices and cooking skill. Fat mice. The most disturbing medieval delicacy had to be dormice, but not the tiny field mice, you might think. These were special fat mice that were much bigger than modern ones, and wealthy Romans and medieval people considered them the ultimate luxury food. The process of preparing dormice was as cruel as it was disgusting. Poor little dormice were captured and kept in complete darkness inside special clay pots called gloraria. In these prison pots, they were fed nothing but rich foods like walnuts, acorns, and chestnuts. Since they couldn't see light and had nothing to do except eat and sleep, the dormice grew incredibly fat, which was exactly what the cooks wanted. The fatter the dormice, the more impressed dinner guests would be. When the dormice reached maximum fatness, they were killed and cooked in various ways. Some were roasted whole and served at fancy banquets, while others were wrapped in pastry to make elegant little pies. The richest Romans even had special dormouse farms with huge enclosures where Thousands of these creatures were fattened up like tiny livestock, serving the biggest, fattest, juiciest dormice. Became a competition among wealthy people who wanted to show off their money and status. One particularly dedicated Roman named Titus Pompeius built a 4-square-mile enclosure just for raising dormice on his estate, even though a Roman law tried to ban serving dormice at banquets in 115 BC. People ignored it because the dish was too popular and delicious to give up. But wait, we're not done yet. Those 10 foods were just the beginning of medieval weirdness. I've got 3 more absolutely insane foods that will make everything you just heard seem normal. These bonus foods are so crazy that even medieval people thought they were pretty wild. Get ready for the ultimate shock. Jumping Frog Pie's medieval dinner parties featured live entertainment that would terrify modern guests and probably get restaurants shut down today. Cooks would bake pies with live frogs hidden inside instead of regular filling, creating the ultimate dinner surprise. When the unsuspecting host cut open the pie at the dinner table, dozens of frogs would leap out and hop all over the table. Some frogs would land in people's wine cups, others would hop onto fancy dresses, and a few would disappear under the table, never to be seen again. Guests never knew if their pie contained actual food or live animals, making every meal a terrifying surprise. This wasn't an accident or prank. It was planned entertainment that wealthy people paid good money for. Medieval party planners would specifically order live pies to amaze their guests. The goal was to create memorable dinner parties that people would talk about for years. Modern health inspectors would have a heart attack, but medieval folks thought hopping frogs at dinner were absolutely hilarious. Deer gut pie, humble pie, was made from all the gross internal organs of deer and wild animals that hunters couldn't sell as regular meat to wealthy customers. Hearts, livers, intestines, kidneys, and other slimy bits were chopped up and carefully seasoned before being baked into pies with thick crusts. This wasn't punishment food for poor people. Wealthy families actually considered it a special holiday treat that showed off their hunting skills. Medieval families looked forward to humble pie during Christmas celebrations and important feast days throughout the year. The pie was often the centerpiece of holiday dinners, served with great ceremony and pride. Hunters who brought home deer would save all the organs specifically for making humble pie, since wasting any part of an animal was considered sinful and wasteful. The phrase eating humble pie actually comes from this dish, because humble and humble sounded similar. But there was nothing humble about serving humble pie. It was considered fancy food that required skill to prepare properly, and showed you could afford to hunt big game. These medieval food facts reveal eating habits that make modern cooking shows look tame by comparison. While we complain about pineapple on pizza, medieval people were literally eating dolphin soup and roasted cat with garlic sauce. The craziest part? These weren't desperate survival foods. They were expensive delicacies that rich people bragged about serving to important guests. You could impress friends at your next dinner party by sharing these shocking food facts, though please don't actually. Try cooking any of these recipes at home. Modern food historians studying these medieval meals report that many dishes were surprisingly tasty despite sounding absolutely disgusting to our modern sensibilities. Want to learn more crazy historical facts that will amaze your friends and family? Subscribe for more unbelievable stories from history that prove the past. It was way weirder than you ever imagined. Don't let boring history fool you. Our ancestors were eating things that would make reality. TV chefs quit their jobs forever.